Communication models. Communication. Communication is the process of creating, interpreting, and negotiating meaning. Communication can be verbal, non-verbal, or textual. It can take different forms such as oral, visual, or even physical. Although communication occurs in a variety of different ways, it is always a learned behavior. While most human beings are born with the physical abilities to speak, to hear, to see, and so on, people must learn to communicate through codes, symbols, and system of language. In this way, communication is a collective practice in which people use symbols to generate and interpret meaning. Communication models. To explain the process of communication, researchers have developed several models. The three most well known models for communication are linear, interactional, transactional. Again, I tell you linear, interactional, and transactional. The model provides pictures or visual representations of complex interactions. They are useful because they simply the basic structure of communication and can help us to understand that structure not just verbally but also visually. Most importantly, they identify the various elements of communication and serve as a kind of map to show how different parts of the communication process are interrelated. First model is linear model. Originally developed by Shannon and Weaver in 1948, this model describes communication as a linear process. This model describes how a sender or speaker transmit a message to a receiver or listener. More specifically, the sender is the source of the message. A message may consist of sounds, words, or behaviors in a communication interaction. The message itself is transmitted through a channel, the pathway or route for communication, to a receiver, who is the target or recipient of this message. There may be obstacles in the communication process or noise. Noise refers to an interference in the channel or distortion of message. This is the fairly simple model in which a message is simply passed from the sender to receiver. So all of you listen this diagram. Center communication starts from the center to the receiver. It will reach to the receiver from a specific channel. So communicator that is center generates a message or form a message and transport into the receiver via a channel. Sometimes in channel or channel unwanted interruptions noises may occur. That is called as channel noise. The recipient of the message is called as receiver. While the linear model was highly influential during the mid 20th century, this model is perhaps too simple. Its limitations are easy to see if you fast to think about the beliefs about communication or assumptions made in this model. First, this model assumes that the communication only goes in one direction. Here, a person can be sender or receiver, but not both. This is problematic because communication in action is more dynamic than the linear model suggests. In action, communication involves give and take between senders and receivers in which listeners are not simply passive receptacles for a sender's message. This model also limited because it provides only one channel for only one message. Finally, it implies that the message themselves are clear cut with a distinct beginning and distinct end. However, communication is rarely, if ever, as neat and tightly as linear model would suggest. Second one is interaction model. In the move to a more dynamic view of communication, interaction models follow two channels in which communication and feedback flow between sender and receiver. Feedback is simply a response that a receiver gives to a sender. Most importantly, feedback indicates comprehension. It can help senders know if their message was received and understood. By focusing on flow and feedback, interactional models view communication as an ongoing process. See this message, sender send a message to the receiver reply to the sender. This is called as feedback. So message to receiver again send a message to sender. That is called as feedback. The reply of the receiver is also called as the feedback. In final feature of this model is the field of experience. The field of experience refers to how environment, experiences, culture, and even heredity can influence how a sender construct a message. Keep in mind that each person bring a unique field of experience to an interaction. Likewise, each communication interaction is unique. While the interactional model is more dynamic than the linear model, it still contains some limitations. For instance, this model implies that while people can be both senders and receivers, they cannot do simultaneously. In live communication, roles are not quite so clear cut and in fact are more fluid. The transactional is the most dynamic of the communication model. One notable features of this model is the move from referring to people as senders and receivers to referring to people as communicators. This implies that communication is achieved as people both send and receive messages. Fundamentally, this model views communication as a transaction. In other words, communication is a cooperative action in which communicators co create the process, outcome, and effectiveness of this interaction. Unlike the linear model, in which meaning is sent from one person to another, also unlike the interactional model, in which understanding is achieved through feedback, people creates shared meaning in a more dynamic process in the transactional model. So we understand from this picture. So communicator 1 sent a message to communicator 2, communicator 2 and again send a message to communicator. So both are the communicators. They communicate continuously between them. This model also places more emphasis on the field of experience. While each communicator has a unique field of experience, they must also inhabit a shared field of experience. In other words, communicators must share at least some degree of overlap in culture, language, environment if people are to communicate at all. This model also recognizes that messages will influence the responses or subsequent messages produced in the communication interaction. This means that messages do not stand alone but instead are interrelated. The principle of interrelation states that the messages are connected to and built upon one another. The transactional model forms the basis for much communication theory because people are viewed as dynamic communicators rather than simple senders or receivers. There must be some overlap in fields of experience in order to build shared meaning and messages interdependent. The transactional understanding of shared meaning has informed a variety of communication theories. In general terms, a theory comprises a way of seeing, interpreting, and explaining. A theory is a framework for understanding. It illuminates social practices and helps to make sense of the everyday life world. Truham or Kellner Trugam and Kellner suggest that we consider a theory as a way of seeing an optic that focuses on specific subject matter. Think about a theory as an optic or a technology that visual literacy is the ability to make sense of the whole range of visual information, essentially to be able to read visuals, appreciating and being able to interrogate or analyze both literal and inferred meaning enhances vision. Just as there are many different communication theories, there are also many different visual technologies. Sunglasses, contacts, or even virtual reality Googles each has helped to see in the certain way. For instance, when you put on a pair of classes, it will cause you to see in a particular way, focusing things near or far depending on the types of lens. In this way, every different theory will require a different way of seeing the world of communication. The most important part of this metaphor is that a particular theory will bring specific aspects of communication into focus, it may blur others. As you work through this book, pay attention to the way in which a particular perspective illuminates certain elements while leaving others in shadow. Also, think about how exploring different theories will provide a more comprehensive look at communication while also allowing you to select those that will be of greatest use for your interest in communication studies. Thank you.